Hi everyone, it's Peter Zalum's Griniflix Adventure 8 and welcome to another video. Today's video is for Leica users. Leica users using the M range cameras, and particularly those people that like to use the rangefinder as opposed to live view or the electronic viewfinder. And it's to do with what happens when you focus on infinity. And do you get the best shot at infinity, or do you get a best shot when you just back off just a little bit off infinity? That's what this video is about. I did an earlier video using my 21mm lenses, the Elmarit 2.8 and also the Summilux 1.4 21mm lens on my Leica M10 Monochrom and my Leica M10R, and how convenient it was to use that in-camera perspective control using live view. One thing I did notice, and that's the topic of this video, is that my focus was different. What happens when you focus on infinity, what's in focus, particularly things in the long distance area here, and what's not. And what I did notice accidentally was that when I was taking shots at infinity versus when I was taking shots just a bit back off of infinity, I was getting a clearer shot, long distance shot, by doing that then putting it on infinity and doing a long distance shot. The lens that I was using when I noticed it was the 21mm f2.8 Elmarit, which then obviously prompted the question, well, is it that lens or is it something that's peculiar to other Leica lenses, or any lens really? Anyway, so that's what this video is about. Got a long time to get there, wasn't it? Didn't I? So I'm going to take a few shots with different Leica lenses on the M series camera, and the point of the exercise is to shoot wide open, because I know most of my Leica lenses shooting wide open produces outstanding results. So we're just going to shoot wide open at infinity, take a shot, particularly in long distance shots like this, back off slightly. And that, so in this case here, 35mm lens, I'm backing off maybe 1 or 2 degrees of rotation, and then taking a shot, and then comparing the infinity shot compared to backing off. That's going to be dependent on obviously the lens I'm using, but anyway, just effectively backing off the infinity, and then seeing what happens to my long distance landscape, cityscape shots. Is the focus better when you just back off slightly? I'm using the Summilux f2 Apple 35mm lens, and I know for a fact from using this and also testing it that this is one of Leica's best, most detailed lenses, so I have no qualms with regards to the type of results I'm going to get with this. So the first shot I'm going to take, if you would take an exposure reading, that's just fine. Alright, so I'm going to have to, we've got a lot of light, so I'm going to have to stop down a little bit, maybe 2.8, let's see what we've got here. Okay, so 4,000ths of a second. And now we'll back off slightly, so I'll back off about 3 degrees, I'd say. I'll take the same shot. So even when you back off that 3 degrees, in the rangefinder, you're actually seeing the images split. So when I've got it at infinity, the images are lined up, as far as those distant images are concerned, completely. And then when I back off, they do split. So if I'm looking through the rangefinder, it does appear that it's going to be out of focus. I have a number of Leica lenses, so I'm going to be doing this with all the Leica lenses that I have, and just to see what sort of consistency or inconsistency there is between the focal lengths. Now it does make sense that you should be backing off, because infinity implies that it's a distance far, far beyond, you know, like the stars would be considered as infinity. So even a distance shot like this, where those that tower there is probably about 3 kilometers away. It's not infinity, is it? So if you back off just a little bit, you might find it's in focus more. But anyway, the results will show one way or another. Okay, so here are the two shots that I took. So the one on the left is with the focus at infinity. Now on the one on the right, I backed off the focus from infinity by about 1 millimeter. So I sort of calculated that's probably around 2 degrees rotation. This is at 400%. Let's go in even further. So now we're at 800% zoomed in. So you can see this little spot here in the photograph. And what's the difference? Which one is sharper, clearer, has greater contrast? So the one on the left or the one on the right? So the one on the left is focused at infinity. The one on the right is focused just a little bit short of infinity by that 1 or 2 degrees rotation. I think the one on the right gets it. What do you think? Go to another section here somewhere. This tower in the distance here. The one on the left or the one on the right? I suspect the one on the right is sharper, isn't it? On the left there is at infinity. The one on the right is just short of infinity. If this was taken at night and we had some stars at infinity, I might have to do this test again and just see how this lens stacks up in the middle of the night with stars, and whether those stars are actually in focus at infinity or slightly out of focus, and slightly out of focus when you back off slightly. Would be an interesting exercise. This is something for rangefinder users to consider. If you're using electronic viewfinder, well then it's either in focus or not, of course. Okay, well I've repeated this test with 19 of my manual lenses, Leica, Voigtlander and Nikon Nikkor lenses. The location is the balcony at my place looking into the distance. I will put this section of the video showing how it was done right at the very end of this video, so if you are really interested you can watch the end. But otherwise we can just go into the chart and we can talk about my observations across all the different lenses, the focal lengths. Okay, so here's my fancy chart. So 19 lenses, lens description here. So I start off with my Leica lenses, a couple of Voigtlanders, and then all the Nikon Nikkor manual lenses, plus a couple of really odd ones at the end here. My two columns here, focus at infinity, so literally the lens at infinity taking the shot, and then moving the focus just back slightly from infinity. Now how much I moved back did vary on the lens, depending on the focal length of that lens. Now the body that I used was the Leica M240p, and I did have my electronic viewfinder clipped on so that I could see focus peaking quite easily and see what was in focus and what wasn't. So in doing the test, these are the results. On the wide angle lenses, the 21mm, both the Summilux and the Elmerit, as well as the 35 Summilux and the 35 Monochrom, I found that in all cases I had to back off just slightly, and did vary a little bit. It was backing off very little on the Monochrom, and also the 21 1.4 was only backed off really slightly. And probably the 21mm f2.8 I backed off the most to get a better shot with greater detail in the overall photograph. The 50mm Notilux, the Summilux, the 90mm Apo f2 Monochrom, they were basically, you had them on infinity and you had the sharpest shot. As soon as you even backed off slightly from infinity, the distance would then be less sharp, but then your foreground started to come into focus, which you would expect. The Voigtlander 15mm, same sort of thing. The Voigtlander 35mm Nocton Classic actually was at infinity was the sharpest, and then as soon as you start to back off slightly, when the foreground starts to come into focus and the background starts to go out of focus. In the Nikkor lenses, the 24mm was the same sort of thing. You backed off slightly to get a better shot. Same with the 35 1.4, the 50mm 1.2. The 50mm 1.4 AI lens, that was, if you had it on infinity, that's exactly what was in focus. And as soon as you backed off, then the foreground started to come into focus and the background out of focus. The Nikon 55 Micro, same sort of thing, back off slightly, got everything in focus. 85 1.4, 85 2.0, same sort of thing. The Nikon AI 135 f2.8, that was, again, you put it on infinity and that's exactly what you got in focus. The Tokina 17mm, same sort of thing, back off slightly, got a better shot. And then this was the shittiest lens, the Super Travanon Mirror 500mm f8. Actually, I will do a video on this one just to show you how bad it is. It's a bit of a laugh, but anyway, that you also backed off slightly to actually get a better shot. Yeah, so understanding the infinity focus of your lens is important, particularly in situations like night photography where you want to put your lens on infinity, but you want to check where the maximum detail is for your shot. It's not something that's unique to the manual lenses. It's also common with automatic focus lenses as well. So for example, Nikon 28 to 300mm zoom lens. Yeah, so if I rotate that, you can see that you can see the dials there, I get to infinity, and then I go past infinity as well. And I know from past experience, you actually have to get to the center of infinity, and that is the maximum focus that is the maximum detail when focusing on infinity for this particular lens. So you need to know your lens. You've got to get to know your lens and experiment with that infinity setting and find out whether it is set at infinity for taking infinity shots or you have to back off slightly. I haven't come across a lens where it's the other way around, where you could never actually get to infinity, so that's good. Yeah, so I think it's worthwhile experimenting and checking out your lenses, whether they be automatic or manual, and just finding out where that infinity is and where you got maximum detail and focus and contrast. What has been your experience? Have you done this experiment yourself? Shooting something that's theoretically infinity or a long distance away? Have you actually noticed slight difference in detail and clarity and contrast? Be interesting to know. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please give it a like. Really appreciate it. That supports the channel. If it's the first time to my channel, then please do subscribe. Press subscribe. Press notifications. You'll be notified when the next video is out. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next video. Cheers, bye. As promised, here's the detail of those shots from the balcony for those diehards that really want to know about the detail. Enjoy, have fun, bye. To Lightroom, and here I've got a bunch of photographs that I've taken from the balcony. So I'm going to be doing an XY, and we'll look at the first pair of photographs here. So we're using the Leica 35mm f1.4 Summilux, and I'm using the Leica M240p as my camera body. But let's zoom in at this is so we've got some things in the distance here. This block of flats is probably about 2 kilometers away from where I'm standing right now on the balcony, and I'm zoomed in at 400%. So the photograph on the left is with the lens turned to infinity as far as it goes. And then the shot on the right here, I am backing off maybe 1 degree rotation on the focus ring, just a little bit off infinity, so not quite at infinity. So the one on the left is at infinity, the one on the right is just a bit off, and have a look at the difference in the photographs. The one that's on the right here, you can see that it's actually a clearer image, more detailed. With the one on the left here, where I've turned it completely to infinity, you do actually start to notice a little bit of purple fringing that starts to go in, starts to show up. Now what I know from past experience, as soon as you start to see purple fringing, it means that's the out of focus area before the focus point. So when you back off a little bit, you actually get rid of that purple fringing because you've got more in focus. Interesting, isn't it? So, and if we look at the rest of the picture, even in the foreground here, you start to pick up some of the detail. Whereas the foreground here on the other one, where it's been at infinity, you don't have that clarity. There you go. So for the Leica Summilux f1.4, when you're focusing on infinity and you want the infinity and everything in focus, and this shot, even though it's showing f4, I'm pretty sure was taken at f2.8. Not wide open, but at f2.8. Backing off slightly off infinity gave you a clearer shot. Well, let's have a look at the next pair of shots. So now I'm shooting with the Apo 35mm f2 and again at f2.8. So the shot on the left here is at infinity. The shot on the right here is just again maybe 1 degree off infinity. Now let's have a look at the difference in the shots. Again, the one that's slightly off infinity, not at infinity, produces a clearer shot. Not as big a difference as with the Summilux 35mm, but still even the Apple does show that up. I mean, it's very hard to tell the difference. This is at 400%, but you do notice it in the foreground here. In the foreground here, the one that's slightly off infinity produces a sharper shot in the foreground compared to the one that's at infinity. Let's have a look at the next pair of shots, and this is with the 50mm Summilux 1.4, and the one on the left is at infinity. Yes, so the one on the left is at infinity, and the one on the right here is just again that 1 degree turn off infinity. Now, interesting about the 50mm 1.4 is that at infinity you actually, in the distance, you get a clearer shot compared to not in the distance of the one that's slightly turned back off infinity by that 1 degree. So what's that showing is that infinity is actually infinity on the 50mm f1.4. When we start getting into the foreground here, because we've turned the one on the right here where we're just slightly off infinity, it means that the foreground becomes more in focus, as you would expect, than the one that's on the left here. Okay, the next pair of shots. This one is the 50mm Notilux, and let's see what happens there. With the Notilux, it's like the Summilux at infinity. In the distance, it is actually sharper, then backing off slightly on the right here. And then when we look into the foreground, it's really hard to tell what the difference is between the two shots actually with the Notilux. The Notilux is at 2.8, shooting at f2.8, even though in Lightroom it's showing f4. The Notilux actually does an outstanding result. So at infinity, it's produced a great result at infinity, super sharp right in the distance, and also in the foreground. And then when it's backed off slightly, then you do actually back off on in the infinity focus there, and it does bring the foreground into more focus, I suspect. Yes, you can probably notice in the brickwork here right in the foreground, and the car in the foreground is a little bit more in focus than the the one that's at infinity. Alright, next lens comparison, and which one is this one? This is the 90mm f2 Summilux at 2.8. So at infinity it's actually exactly what you expect. It is in sharper focus than when you're backing off slightly on the 90mm one. And when we look close to the foreground, then yes, you would expect the foreground is more in focus because you backed off on the 90mm. And then at infinity, the foreground is obviously more so out of focus, which is what you would expect with the 90mm. Okay, what happens with the now this is the Voigtlander 35mm f1.4 at f2.8. So here, focused at infinity, the one on the left here is look, it's at infinity is much the same as when you're backing it off slightly. But what you do notice with backing off slightly is that your foreground becomes more in focus on the 35mm Voigtlander compared to the turned fully to infinity. Yeah, so in infinity, is it? Which one's sharper? Voigtlander 35, it's debatable. Anyway, it's hard to tell between the Voigtlander. But anyway, if backing off slightly produces a better result in anything before infinity and bringing it back towards the foreground. And what happens with this is the 15mm f4.5 Voigtlander. So this is shot at 5.6. So at infinity on the left, backing off slightly off infinity on the right. I think the one backing off slightly with Voigtlander gives you a better result for infinity and also for the foreground compared to on infinity in the background, compared to infinity shot. Well, okay, so this has prompted me to actually do this test across all my manual lenses, including the Nikon lenses, and I do have a chart to see, and we can have a look at the result on the chart.